I wanted to learn everything I could, so I started researching and going to medical libraries. I was amazed by what I learned. Osteoporosis is a disease that worries a great many women today. In later years, the bones can become thin and fragile, and they can break quite easily.
You know, the bones look very thin here.
When I was told that I had osteoporosis, I became very frightened because I'm still young. And I literally just fell apart. I remember going to bed and crying, and my husband came in and said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "I'm disintegrating."
Osteoporosis is a loss of bone tissue. And as a result, when somebody gets osteoporosis, they've essentially lost 50 to 75% of their bone tissue before they get a fracture. And then what happens is they cough or sneeze and they break a rib, or they ride over a bumpy road and they break a backbone. When you look around the world and you see where osteoporosis is common and rare, you're struck by the fact that it's common where people seem to eat the best. In the sense when you consume lots of dairy products, like in countries such as the United States, England, Finland, Sweden, you have the highest rates of osteoporosis. Where they consume the least dairy products, like in your Asian and African countries, they have the strongest bones, the least osteoporosis.
Again, that could be a coincidence, but some don't think it is.
And one of the characteristics in osteoporosis that I think, at least, is rather important, has to do with the intake of animal protein. Animal protein, for example, has been shown to increase the loss of calcium from the body, which, of course, puts a person at a greater risk.
Dairy products contain calcium, which helps to build strong bones. But they also contain concentrated protein, and some suspect that depletes the body of calcium. Dr. Clapper explained the theory.
When one eats a piece of concentrated protein, for the next 3 or 4 hours, more calcium than usual can be lost out of the body through the urine. And when the body loses this mineral, it replaces it by drawing calcium out of the bones. So a high-protein diet, along with smoking and lack of exercise and other factors, may contribute to bones that are thin and fracture easily.
Osteoporosis tends to be a disease characteristic of Western countries, which is really quite interesting because it turns out that in this country, if we listen to the traditional information, it is suggested that the higher the calcium intake, the lower the risk for osteoporosis in women. And so women are being advised to take more calcium. But it's rather strange that in China, where calcium intake is so much lower than here, they actually have lower osteoporosis, not higher.
There are 4 groups that foods are put in. The first one are the dairy products. We have things like...
I remember in school learning about the 4 basic food groups and believing every word of it. I assumed it was the product of the wisdom of our culture.
How many of you had anything from the dairy products today?
Just look at the fine print sometimes on the kind of materials that have been used in the past in our schools. And you'll see, of course, that much of this information is provided by the industry itself, and of course they stand to gain.
Ice cream, cheese, and yogurt. Tony.
I wanted to hear what the dairy industry would say.
The Dairy Council is a nutrition, education, and research arm of the dairy industry. The National Dairy Council came into being in 1917, so the dairy industry has had a long history of interest in nutrition research and nutrition education, and I might say long before it became the consumer topic that it is today.
The Basic 4 food groups, which hangs on the school walls, is an advertisement from industry.
The Dairy Council isn't in the business of sales per se. It's in the business of education and research. And if it sells anything with quotes around it, I would say it sells good nutrition, and that's what it's always sold.
You know, people believe in the Basic 4 food group because that's what we've been taught ever since we were little kids. But look at the consequences of that kind of belief. We have a country, very modernized country, high-tech country, where disease is the norm. I mean, half the people die of heart disease. 1 out of 10 women gets breast cancer. Obesity is an epidemic. That's the consequence of believing in the Basic 4 food group.
What do the 4 food groups really communicate to children? People have different opinions.
If you have 4 basic food groups and 2 of them are meats and dairy products, we're saying to our children that half your food choices should be animal products.
What about this? Which food group? Noah?
The Dairy Council and many schools follow well-established guidelines. But some believe that new findings now justify a change.
Well, the Dairy Council itself has never set public health guidelines, and we see our role really as helping to interpret the guidelines that are out there. And the guidelines today, as most people know, are 30% of calories from fat. And it is possible, and because we do interpret how to do that every day, it's possible to eat a variety of foods, some higher in fat and trading off for some lower in fat to get to that 30%.
I'm suggesting that really it ought to be much lower than that. That the evidence from the scientific literature, not just what we have, but more so from the other scientific literature, suggests that getting down around 15 to 20% of calories, or maybe even lower, is advantageous. And the only way that one can get down that low is not to just consume low-fat products, is what we tend to say now, but more to actually begin to cut out animal foods. In the future, that's the kind of information that we're going to hear more about.
What should we be teaching our children? What sort of diet does promote health?
Around the world, when people are trim and healthy, they suffer from various diseases that we don't have. For example, they have malaria and cholera and so on, but they don't suffer from the heart disease and the breast cancer and the obesity that we have. And the reason is very simple. They center their diet around starch. Absolutely essential that people understand this. This is not a diet of salads and broccoli and cauliflower that we're talking about. We're talking about a diet of rice and potatoes and other types of grains and vegetables, starchy vegetables, with the addition of fruits and vegetables on the side. And that's what people eat in rural Africa and in China and Japan until they become rich.
In China, Dr. Campbell compared regions that are relatively poor to areas which are a good deal more affluent. You might expect the people with a higher standard of living to have better health. Instead, they have more of certain cancers, heart disease, and diabetes. Some believe the crucial difference is this: affluent people eat more animal products.
Animal foods have certain characteristics that would argue raises the risk for some of these diseases. In contrast, plant foods contain factors that actually prevent these diseases from occurring.